Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is the webinar that has invited 3 friends and colleagues from independent schools within and throughout New York to reflect on their experiences, answering the question, what's it like to be who they are in schools at this moment, and in general. Coincidentally, our 3 panelists this evening are also independent school alums. So you'll get some responses that will draw on their experiences as students and other responses as educators within the independent school community. In a moment, I'm going to invite each of them to introduce themselves, to provide us with an understanding of where they work, in what role, what pronouns they use, how long they've been at their school, and what type of school they work within. And if they have, they can also talk about their experience as alums of an independent school. And then, if there's opportunities for questions and you are joining us live, I invite you to please use the chat feature and directly message me so that I can post questions that are relevant and of interest to those of you joining live. And if you are viewing this, then I sincerely hope that if your questions have not been answered during tonight's webinar, that you seize the opportunity to email me directly at jobfair@NYSAIS.org. I promise I will respond to your messages as soon as I am able to. My name is Liz Fernandez. I have been with the NYSAIS Job Fair to Promote Diversity for 21 years. I actually am a candidate from the mid-90s, and I've served both as a candidate, as a school representative, and now as the event organizer and administrator. And I'm very grateful this evening to my colleague Marcy Mann from NYSAIS, who is offering behind the scenes tech support. And in a moment, I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So thanks again for joining, for being on time, for your presence and interest. And here we go. Rashed, can I ask you to go first, Elizabeth second, Matt third? Please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about you, your schools, and your experiences as alumni of independent schools.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Can you just give me a quick thumbs up to confirm that you hear me? All right, great. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining. My name is Rashed Randolph. I use he, him, his pronouns. I currently serve as the assistant principal for student life at the Ethical Culture Fieldston School in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. It's more commonly known as Fieldston. This is my 2nd year there, so I'm in like my 19th month there, but this is my 19th year in independent school education. I have worked in boarding schools, co-ed boarding schools. I've worked in a single-sex school, and I've worked in a mid-size New York independent school, and I'm now at Fieldston, which is one of the largest co-ed day schools in New York City. And Liz, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think Fieldston is the only independent school in New York with 2 lower schools, because we have Ethical Culture near Central Park West, and then we have Fieldston Lower School up in the Riverdale campus. My job entails me dealing with anything that is non-academic. So anything that has to do with student health and wellness, social emotional learning, diversity, protocols and procedures around emergencies, evacuations, fire drills, lockdowns, dealing with the kitchen staff, making sure the menu is on point. All of that stuff crossed my desk in some way, shape, or form. So I'm generally around campus and a pretty busy guy. I'm an independent school alum. I attended a boarding school in Rhode Island. That's actually how I got into independent schools. I was destined, I thought at least, to head into sports marketing and public relations because I speak a few languages. I'm a language instructor by trade, and I was a college athlete. So I swore I was on the way to being an international business guy. And the headmaster from my school asked me to come back and teach for 2 years, just for 2 years. And here I am in my 19th year in independent school education. What keeps me in it is the fact that every day is different. When you work with teenagers, no 2 days are ever the same. And so I will stop there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Gillory. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, because I just switched to a new device. Fantastic. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I have the great pleasure of working at Sacred Heart, which is a pre-K to grade 12 school located on the east side of Manhattan. I've been the Associate Director of Admissions and Financial Aid for 10 years. And in addition to that, I've always been involved in community building, beyond just building community and adding new students every year to the school. I've also been involved in DEI. And this year it's officially, my title is Diversity Coordinator of Community Life. Then I've also been involved in onboarding. So when our new faculty and staff come to the community, how do they feel a part of the community and understand our culture, being a faith-based school and part of an international network of 160 schools worldwide? And so how do they really, embody our mission? And so when that someone like me, who is actually a graduate of Sacred Heart and an alum, how do you kind of digest all of this mission and the school culture without actually attending it? So it's a real great pleasure to be able to share kind of what I learned as a child of this idea of courage and confidence and faith and intellectual values to our faculty and staff as they then continue to teach the next generation. I think, kind of how did I come into independent schools? It's exactly about with our mission. I was a career changer, actually. Like Rashed, I was thinking communications too when I left college. I was in public relations, working for a firm that worked with a lot of nonprofit and corporate clients. And I was always curious about their community events. And so kind of that led me to then say, you know what? I'm interested in community. I think I need to do a little bit more. And I remembered my headmaster, or it was actually a headmistress at the time when I was younger, who said, you've been given all of these opportunities, make sure you're sharing it with the world. And so that led me to become a public school teacher. And then one fateful day, I was kind of looking around for something new. And my director of alumni relations, who I stayed in close contact with and was on the alumni board at Sacred Heart, said, our new head of schools mentioned your name the other day, and we have an admissions position. We think you should come in and actually interview for it. And that was 11 years ago. And I'm still, at the school community today. So I'll stop there.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Suzuki. My pronouns are he, him, his. And this is my 34th year working in schools and 32nd year working in independent schools. I'm currently the admissions director at Rye Country Day School out in Rye, New York. If you're not familiar with that, it's a good 20-something miles outside of New York City, close to the Connecticut border. How did I get into independent schools? I'm an alum, and like Randolph said, or not like he said, but as he shared, my path to independent schools came from the headmaster. While I was a student there, the headmaster kind of one day said to me, "You ever thought of being a teacher?" I had a job, quite honestly, the second semester of my senior year, because he had come to my college campus to do interviews. I grew up in Hawaii, and my school was in Hawaii. And you might wonder why I'm here, especially with incoming snow, but it's because of the weather. Anyway, so I started as a history teacher. I love teaching, but I slowly got into administration. After that, I moved east. So this is my 14th year at my 18th year at Rye Country Day School. Whoops. And currently the admissions director. And what keeps me going and what keeps me so interested in schools in general are the students. My job currently deals with hundreds of students who are trying to be admitted to an independent school like mine, but I really like seeing the progress of students over this course of a school year. So I've taught many times. I'm a history teacher by trade, but I also am an advisor. So, I like every morning going to homeroom and seeing the students and interacting with them and seeing their progress and growth over the years. Five of my advisees are graduating this year, thank goodness. And it is so nice to see, and it's so rewarding to see them get to that point of maturity, but also going on to the next stage of their lives. So I'll stop there as well. Liz?
Terrific. So it's really wonderful to welcome the three of you, in particular because the series of questions, and again, those of you that are live, certainly send me direct questions if there are things that you'd like to ask. One of my questions to the three of you is, given the fact that you're all independent school alums, I'm super curious for you to reflect, however many years you've been in independent school education, what has changed over time and what remains the same within independent schools, within working with youth, being responsive and partnering with families to teach and guide them to operationalize institutional missions and to ensure that ultimately the young people that graduate from these schools go on to whatever the next level of their lives are and are productive, contributing global citizens into the universe. So what's changed and what's stayed the same? I'm going to ask Elizabeth to go first, Rashed second, and Matt third.
Oh, well, let's see. When I entered independent schools, it was 1984. And, I was a first grader traveling from New Jersey every day to come into a big, huge building that was definitely a whole new world for me, from my little suburban neighborhood where I was just going to a little parochial school in New Jersey. Not little, but it was much smaller than a place of 700 kids. And then coming into a independent school that was Catholic, but not a parochial school. And what did it mean to be part of this network? What things have stayed the same, I think, at Sacred Heart and for independent schools is the idea of tradition. And there's certain things that we've even learned in all of our schools that are on this call and that we represent had Black app pages this summer. And if you're not familiar with that, it was alums and current students sharing what their experience, a lot of those who identified as students of color, and what was things that stayed the same even through some of the painful moments was the idea of traditions, of like coming back for a reunion or that special day of a field day, or there were certain elements of their education that they really relied on. And so there's certain things that we should keep in independent schools. The things that have changed, I think, is that the idea of, and especially with faculty and staff of color and for our students, is the not only the awareness, but then the action of understanding that you cannot bring new people into a space and just say, like a party, like, oh, well, I gave you the invitation, like you should be satisfied you're here. But to really say, like, how are you here? How have I brought you into the conversation? How have I taught you the traditions when maybe it is new to you because you don't live around the corner, or this is your first time in an independent school, or you don't speak the primary language that we put all of our communications in. And to really have that understanding, what has changed, thank goodness, is that awareness of and action of, let me find ways to make sure that you feel like you belong here. And that's what's really wonderful to see.
Thanks. Rashed?
I will add to that. I entered independent schools in 1994 by going away to a boarding school through educational access program called A Better Chance. It was a program that took students, gifted students from inner city communities and connected them with independent schools. There are a bunch of programs like that. There's A Better Chance, Oliver Scholars, Teak, Jersey Seeds. So you hear about a lot of these programs. And I thought I was kind of prepared, but I was young. I was 13. And I showed up to campus after going to an all-Black private school in the South Bronx, which was unheard of at the time. And I wound up being one of 5 Black children in a class of 103. And ended up by the end of freshman year being the only Black male in the grade for the rest of my high school career. And so A lot about what Elizabeth said about tradition is very true. For example, Elizabeth and I both mentioned headmaster, headmistress, and Matt also mentioned headmaster. Now schools don't even use that term anymore. They use head of school instead of the headmaster, headmistress thing. Because one of the traditional pieces to keep in mind is that many schools, especially the boarding schools, which the majority of them in the nation tend to be in New England, were not founded with people of color in mind. And for that matter, even not necessarily females in mind. They were typically all boys, and they were meant to be pipelines to have the upper class 1% have a pipeline directly to top-notch colleges so that they can go on into either politics or into Fortune 500 companies to continue that chain of command that their families had established. So, and looking at the history of a lot of these schools, many of them did not integrate racially or go co-ed until the 60s or 70s. So we're talking, you know, maybe 50 years ago at most for many schools. So the tradition sometimes is hard to crack through. I am happy though to see that many schools have increased not only their numbers in regards to students of color, international students, but also the accompanying support that is needed at those schools. So they are looking into hiring more diversity practitioners and hiring faculty of color, and not only hiring their alums to come back and teach. They're looking at other places to recruit faculty of diverse backgrounds. But one of the challenges that still remains in many schools is not the recruiting, but rather the retention of the faculty of color over the course of time.
So I'm glad Rashed brought up the history of independent schools, because I think that's key to know if you're not so familiar with independent schools. The older independent schools, primarily centered in the Northeast, they were founded to keep people separate, quite honestly. It's to keep, initially it was to keep classes separate. Of course, race was always an issue. Then it went by religion and all those different types of things. But there was a reckoning of sorts in the 60s and the 70s, where organizations like NAIS, the National Association of Independent Schools, tried to correct institutional systemic wrongs by incorporating initiatives, quite frankly, to diversify school communities. So it's been a long time, and there have been some changes. Of course, more changes is needed, but there are some changes. But to address Liz's question directly, over my years of working in independent schools, I found that if you take a look at mission statements at most independent schools, they basically all sound the same. They may use different words and they may use different approaches, but by and large, independent schools are trying to prepare the future leaders of the world. And they use all kinds of different words and adjectives to describe what kind of leaders and scholars they want to have graduate from their institutions. I think the means and the methods may have shifted a bit over time, but I think by and large, I think independent schools have gone more, they're more student focused than before. It used to be more of a sage on stage type of teacher centered classroom. And now I think universally, they're more student centered, which is great, I think. I do think that independent schools continue to have smaller classes. They continue to have strong sense of community by and large. And I think independent schools try to foster a really strong partnership between the schools and families. And I think that's what makes independent schools stand out a little bit more. And I think I'll stop there. Liz?
Great. So tonight's panel, as I mentioned earlier, it's a coincidence that they all happen to be independent school alums, which I think gives you some insight. I'm super curious for you all to reflect on some of the professional highlights so far in your career as educators. So separating from the perspective of being an alum, what are some of the professional highlights that you've experienced whether at your current school or at any of the previous schools that you perhaps might have worked at. Matt, can you go first, Elizabeth second, and Rashad third? Thanks.
Sure. So some professional highlights, over the years, what's really nice is at the end of the school year when everyone's ready to have a vacation, and it's right around graduation time, what always was a reward for me professionally was when students that you taught years ago will come and say thank you, and they'll drop by. In Hawaii, there's a little bit of a tradition where the senior portraits that they take for the yearbook, they have like little copies made, and they actually write something on it, and they give portraits to past teachers. And over the years, when I was working in Hawaii, I got hundreds of them because students were just that grateful. And for me, just to know that unbeknownst to me, I guess, I don't want to put words in their mouths, but the profound, I guess, or the effect that I had on them and the influence, it's so gratifying to feel something like that, both in my capacity as a teacher and as an administrator. Other professional highlights are things like this, getting together with other administrators and teachers at independent schools to talk about topical things. In this case, it is a job fair to promote diversity because that's a very important thing. Lots of professional development is just, I think for me, there are conferences and other things that are regular, well, not now, but in non-COVID times, it is so great to bump into the same folks that you see all the time and to create a wonderful network. In Hawaii, we call it ohana, which means family. And it's such a nice family to see whenever you go to certain conferences like the People of Color Conference, or you go to the Admissions Directors Conference at Mohonk, things like that. There is a nice professional family within independent schools that you get to know. So for me, it's twofold, right? It's the individual students that you meet over time and you interact with over time, as well as the colleagues that you meet over time as well.
Yeah, very similar to Matt. I feel that, there have been, my network that's been a true highlight, is that when I can identify the professional development experience of a particular colleague, whether they're in my school building or not, that I connected with through the various professional development, whether it was, the National Association of Independent Schools does a People of Color Conference. And so that's been really wonderful to connect with my Sacred Heart Network colleagues, because we have 24 in North America, as well as just other admissions folks. I've gotten to meet Matt at, we've connected the national conferences as well as our state conferences, and then through experiences like that. So it's really wonderful to be able to see each other in different spaces. Also, in my coming back to what I considered a second home, I didn't see many leaders of color when I returned to Sacred Heart. So even in a place where I felt like it was home, and it was a place that as a child, there was a lot of things that I identified with and had great pride of being a Sacred Heart graduate. When I was looking for kind of then my next steps and see like, well, I've grown as an adult. I went to a co-ed college. I've been a New York City public school teacher. I've been a publicist. There's other things that I need of mentorship. And I think one of the highlights that helped me with that was being a part of, it's called the Interschool Leadership Institute, where I got to see various leaders of color from various different independent schools and be able to share in our stories, that some of us came from independent school backgrounds, some of us did not, and to really understand my own experiences of things coming back to, because I'm not a kid anymore coming back into this, independent school. I am now a leader in that space, and what kind of things happen just within faculty and staff as they're trying to build a curriculum and a space for kids. And so I think that has been really rewarding of another kind of element of my network of people that I can go to and say, hey, you know, this question happened to me in my department. I have a question about it. And really, I think through the various activities that we did, and it actually was hosted the year that I was in my cohort, was on the Fieldston campus, is that it was through the activities, we really became family. So there's really just like, I can pick up the phone even tonight and say, oh my goodness, I totally flubbed this, you know, workshop, or I did great. And there's just that a level of support there that I just feel is really important. And it's really just important of just figuring out like who are your sponsors and who are your mentors. And I think it's really important to find different professional development opportunities so that you can do that.
Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you later on to explain for those who may not know the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. I think that's really important for people to understand. I too am an ILI alum, and my cohort, our training took place on the Fieldston campus as well. So when I joined the community 2 years ago, I actually felt like I knew a little bit about the how to get around campus. I agree with the talk about networks. As you get into independent schools, you will hear people mention a lot the idea of professional development, especially around People of Color Conference, the NAIS conference. If you are looking at a boarding school, the TABS, the Association of Boarding Schools conference, there are a lot of different opportunities depending on what area of schools you're working in. As Matt and Elizabeth both mentioned, there are things for admissions counselors. There are also things for college counselors. So it depends on what realm you're getting into. But for me, I would say some of the highlights for me is the idea of the growth that I've been able to take on that I wasn't even expecting. So one of the perks for me to come back to my alma mater and to even stay engaged in independent schools was the opportunity to go to graduate school and get my master's degree. I know I also got to give a shout out to Matt. I believe it's Dr. Suzuki now, right? And that was huge because I didn't think about how much of the work I was already doing. I just needed to actually do it in an academic format. So I got my master's degree in Spanish culture and civilization with a focus in performing arts because I'm a musician, an entertainer, a dancer, and I love sharing culture with language students. And attached to that, one of the biggest things I've really enjoyed about forming a sense of community, and that's what boarding schools and independent schools in general really base themselves on. Besides that mission statement that Matt mentioned of mentioning preparing future leaders, is the idea or the sense of community and the relationships that you form because the communities are so close knit. For me, one of the biggest perks has been taking students abroad to travel and to experience other places. And so in my 19 years in independent schools as an educator, I've led international trips, I think 16 or 17 of those years. I've been to Machu Picchu 3 times with different groups of students. I've taken kids to Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, a group of 8th graders to Puerto Rico, taken a class of 108 kids to Spain for 10 days. And so I've got a chance to share my love of travel and also culture with students. And as a language instructor, to see their eyes light up and the light bulb pop off when they're like, oh my God, senor, I can understand what they're saying. I can actually communicate and everything you were talking about in class makes sense. But to see them in their specific element connect with different cultures, whether it's through art, through music, through literature, through poetry, through dance, is really exciting. And then in addition to what Matt said, when they come back, even years later, like I have quite a few advisees that are now PhDs, that are lawyers, that are doctors, and they come back and it's kind of freaky when you get invited to their weddings and you come and people start asking, oh, are you their classmate? And you can say, actually, I was their advisor or I was their teacher. And it's really nice to get that sense. And, the families do maintain a relationship with you because how much you gave of yourself to the students, and they really appreciate that. And so that furthers their love for the school and the school communities in which you dedicate yourself and your time to, because at the end of the day, this work is about being of service to others.
Thanks so much. You mentioned family. There's been a couple of references to parents. One of the questions that's been raised is, what do you all think parents are looking for from independent schools? And I'll note that the question was asked without specificity of the identity of parents. So you can feel free to respond from a perspective of all parents, or to be more specific and to identify from parents of color, if there are even within parents of color, if you want to disaggregate some of the experiences. What are you hearing that parents are looking for from independent schools in general? I'm just going to ask one of you to respond, and then if somebody else has something to add, to take it from there, because we've got quite a few questions in the queue lined up. Anybody want to take that one?
I'll take a stab at it. So,
Awesome.
In my years as a teacher, but also as an admissions director, talking to prospective parents, what I feel that parents are looking for is a school that gets to know who their child is, period. Because, in larger school settings, and not to badmouth any other types of schools, but independent schools by and large are smaller. So we get a chance to get to know the child, and that's what they're longing for. Someone to hear, to know their child, to understand their child, to communicate with their child. I can have great conversations with the parents of my advisees because they know I know their kid. They know that I spend time getting to know them, understanding where they're coming from, their interests, and having conversations with their teachers. And even as a teacher too, I think parents are impressed by how much you know about their child, because by and large teaching loads are lower in independent schools. So you get to know, I could identify the writing of my students when I was a classroom teacher. It's like, I know who that is. And instead of starting from scratch, you can say, okay, comments in an essay. So as we discussed before, you can bring up things because you remember, because you don't have that many students. So I think getting to know the child as an individual is very important to parents.
Elizabeth, you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, Matt and
Great.
I are both right in the middle of admission season right now. So we're hearing a lot of what parents want, especially during notification time. So it's interesting. We have to recognize also, we haven't yet talked about, this is the age of COVID. I know probably Matt and I both have had to do a lot of things virtually this year. And a lot of people on this call are going to have to do their whole job search and interview process virtually. And so just thinking back to the question about what is a family looking for? I think what Matt said, yeah, it's a place where their child is going to feel like they belong. And depending on the school's mission and what they've communicated in the admissions process, it's figuring out like, well, where do I fit as a parent? Some parents want to be more independent, say like, this is my kid's school, I'm over here, and we want that sense of independence. That's what the school has told us they're going to do, and go for it. And others are looking for like, oh, I want to be at the parents association or the PTA meeting, and I want to be there for, cookie decorating and the school fair. And so they're really figuring out exactly how does this fit in their family, because they have to understand that their child is going to spend more waking hours sometimes with their teachers and in their school building than they will at home. And so I think, as I'm seeing in the age of COVID, that people are really, even kids, I deal with middle school admissions, and they're really making decisions, having conversations with their family about like what really matters, like my friends matter, or, my younger brother, I want to make sure I go to a co-ed school because I want to make sure he can come soon. And so, really starting to evaluate like what's important to a family, and that can be an extension of the home that they have.
Thank you. So the next question is an interesting one. So I'm going to paraphrase only slightly because it's two questions that I'm going to combine into one. Do you think, and in what ways, schools are striving to be more diverse and equitable, and what are the limitations? Like how much is too much, or how far is too far? As we think about embracing recruiting and retaining students of color, employees of color? What are your thoughts on that? I'm going to ask Rashed first, Matt second, and Elizabeth third.
That's a very loaded question. And I too am, even though I'm not an admissions director or counselor, I'm on the admissions committee too. So I'm in the middle of admission season and reading applications and essays and whatnot as well. And I think one of the biggest things that schools have to be careful of is focusing on numbers and just accepting kids to say, we have these numbers on display and the students are feeling like they're being put on display rather than being valued for their contributions to the community. I think one misconception, and I learned this from a college admissions counselor a couple of years ago, some people have the impression that all students or students, especially of color, have to be well-rounded and versed in everything. And they actually told me about the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none. And for years, many admissions counselors, and I'm sure my admissions counselor, admission director colleagues here can speak to it, were big on having a lot of students that were well-rounded, especially when you are looking at smaller schools or boarding schools. And what they found was that you started having a lot of students who were just okay at a bunch of things instead of specialists in others. And so there was like a shift, I would say, a little bit ago, in which admissions, especially on the collegiate level, started saying, okay, we're going to take a certain amount of artists, a certain amount of scientists, a certain amount of mathematicians, a certain amount of creative writers. And by putting them together, they create a well-rounded class and they'll feed off of each other. Same thing with faculty. When you're asked to work at an independent school, you're usually asked to wear multiple hats. You're asked to teach, you're asked to advise. In some cases, you may be asked to coach a sport or season or be an advisor for a club. And I think the misconception is you have to be great at everything. You don't, because sometimes it's actually good for the students to see that you're learning along with them. So, if you're going to be the advisor of the chess club and you don't know how to play chess, I actually think students will rock with you even more as they see you going through the learning process to show that you don't have it all together and that you're not perfect. But that's one of the biggest things, is to understand that people, and especially students, don't want to be a spectacle and put on display, especially teenagers. They want to be able to be teenagers at the school and not feel like, oh, I'm just here to help the school's profile.
So Liz, can you reiterate the question? Because I had so many things going in my head and I was listening to Rashed, so I hope I want to stay on focus.
Absolutely. So the question is a combination of two. It's, what are the limits to schools' intentions to really center DEI work, to support, recruit, retain students of color, employees of color? How far is too far, I guess, ultimately?
So I agree with everything that Rashed said, because those are things that I constantly think about. But another thing that I think schools are struggling with, and I think along with the need for the attention that was brought to social justice issues this past spring and summer, I think schools really have to decide, because I think some schools are still struggling with who they are in terms of what kind of school they are. I think some schools want to be everything to everybody, but you can't. Similar to what Rashed was saying, you want to be good at everything. That's a good aspiration, but I don't think everyone can be good at everything. Be good at what you are. And I think schools need to decide what they're good at. And there are some schools that try to be everything to all types of students and families. And I think it's not. I don't think it's healthy for a school to try to be everything to everyone, because then you lose focus and you dilute the power of what your school can be. So while I think it's great for schools to rethink what their role is in terms of social justice and DEI initiatives. I think schools also need to start from inside and introspectively take a look at who they are and who they want to be.
Yeah, I think that's really important. What Rashed and Matt said, that idea of, you bring in all of these experiences to this work, but it's really important to understand not only mission, but what is the direction that the school wants to go in, and really understanding also from what are the limitations. And to really get to that, is the limitations is when you don't have the support and the resources from the top, whether that's the board of trustees, whether it's the head of school and school leadership, that they're not on board to understanding that DEI has to be the center, because we care that each and every child feels like they belong. And that's at all our schools. We want to make sure that we have community. And so if they're not really seeing like how this all fits and why we should have a translator on parent teacher conference day, and it can't just be some of our non-academic staff that is, put in a position where, last minute to come and provide translation services. We have to have those conversations, and they have to understand that, and really say, especially right now with what's happened over the summer, and kind of, we could say, a big catalyst of where our schools are right now was the murder of George Floyd. There was a lot of things kind of like in our schools that we were already kind of thinking about and working through with racial justice. But then, hearing from our alums this summer, and really then schools coming out in our websites, go on, some of the websites now of schools and see how many of them list the anti-racist policies, and we are anti-racist, a commitment to anti-racism. But it's really also then seeing like, well, on that diversity and inclusion page, how many staff people are actually dedicated to the work? What resources do they have? Those are sometimes the limitations. And to say in an interview, like, well, this is where you are. What do you have for next year? Do you have an onboarding program that's going to bring me into this space? Will I have some DEI training to understand exactly where you are with this work? I think that's important.
Thanks so much. I also want to point out, I've been in independent schools. This is either the end of my 26th year or the end of my 27th year. Again, I've lost track. And I have to say that one of the things that I often hear people say, because if you're like me, you've grown up understanding that there are hierarchies, and hierarchies exist in any industry. There's a conversation about a board of trustees or school leadership. I really want to also highlight for everyone who's viewing and who has joined us that part of the quality of the experience that individuals have employed at independent schools also has to do with the people who are most closely working with them. And if you're applying for a faculty position, depending on the age, are you part of a department? Are you part of a grade level team? Are you in a particular division? The support, the understanding, the unwavering commitment to leaning into interrogating your own teaching and pedagogy and praxis as a member of a community that is trying to continuously build equitable communities where our students, our families, our colleagues, the world is reflected, and there's a sense of both an understanding and an empowerment experience. It isn't just the people at the top. It's got to also be people at all levels, and particularly those that you are working most closely with, I think could create pretty significant experiences to engender a sense of belonging for those of us that are in these schools and that have been for years. And it hasn't been without challenges. As we've heard people address, any industry, any sector has challenges in and of itself. I'm super curious for you all to speak about what has kept you in these schools. And let's all agree that for many of us, we will start with the students. So let's recognize that the young people that we are fortunate to work with each and every day has been pretty significant. Beyond the students, what has kept you in these schools, knowing that you're all independent school alums? So presumably you've either been in another industry and then chose this, or at any moment you could choose to be elsewhere. What keeps you? Let's do Elizabeth first, Matt second, and Rashed third.
It's the little things. It could be, when I helped start the affinity space for parents of students of color, it was 4 people gathered around the table who had gone to senior leadership or had gone to the administration, said, we really think we need this space. And there was a lot of steps. This was 5 years ago. There was a lot of steps to get there. And along the way, there were some hard days where I'd come home and I was like, I don't know if this is going to get off the ground. It did. And I consider myself, because of my relationships that I had with Liz, you mentioned about, like, you have to have people in your departments, in your team, beyond just senior leadership. And this gets back to my point, Rashed, you were saying about, you wanted me to explain about mentors and sponsors. There were people in decisions that were making that affinity space, or like that were, considering my proposal. I was helping the parents with it. And my sponsors are people who just know that we have a relationship professionally. They know they're there in the rooms that I'm not when decisions are being made about my projects, my career. My mentors are people where I can have really conversations a lot professionally. We might be at the same level, they might be below me, and that we have a lot of conversations about networking, professional development, and career development, and all these things. Because there were so many sponsors in the rooms that needed to get that proposal through, it happened. And yes, there started at that table just 4 people. But a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from one of the members, and she's like, I'm so glad you're here. And going to their meetings now, and there are 20 people on a Zoom call, and there are 30 people that are on their listserv. It makes the work worth it. That along the way, the steps is that my experience as an alum, I know where the school should be. I know that to be truer to their mission, they have to be anti-racist. And so that's what keeps me there, is that holding them accountable to the mission that they promised me as a child, and that they're promising, and that I am promising, even in admissions, to every single family that walks through the door.
So for me, what makes independent schools so attractive is the independence. So as a classroom teacher, I can teach, I'm not stuck, or stuck is the wrong word. I'm not beholden to a state curriculum or state tests. I can teach, basically whatever I want, as long as I make sure I hit the milestones that my department sets for me, and they're along the way to graduate with the requirements. But I like the independence of independent schools as a teacher. As an administrator, I also like the fact that I could teach as an administrator, because in some school settings, you're in the 2 different unions. You can't teach and be an administrator, but there's that flexibility with independent schools. And similar to what was said earlier, what Elizabeth said, is the fact that there's creativity, that there are things that you can do outside of the box, just because it's never been done before, and you got to get somebody else's approval from the superintendent, state office, blah, blah, blah. Independent schools, you have the freedom to do certain things. And quite frankly, in many cases, you have the resources to do so. So it is, I think it's a nice place to be in terms of working, because you can be a great teacher, you can be a good administrator in a school setting that really supports what you want to do, and initiatives and things that you want. Because, for example, a school like where I am right now, we have initiatives in sustainability, we have initiatives in public purpose. I don't think you're going to find things like that in other school settings. So I think that's what I really like about independent schools. It's the independence.
Matt kind of highlighted a portion of what I was going to say. Instead of me saying using the word independence, I was going to go with autonomy, especially in regards to curriculum. What I love that keeps me here, and it's twofold: it's personal and it's professional. Professionally, it allows me to incorporate my passions into the curriculum. And I've taught everything from fourth grade after school Spanish all the way through the AP language course. And like Matt said, we're not teaching to the state exam. We're not even teaching to the AP exam any longer. You're teaching through the AP exam. You're teaching content. And through the content that you teach, students are ready for the AP exam. But what you'll start to see is that many independent schools, especially even New York City schools, are dropping the AP courses. And they're creating things called advanced topic courses or other courses to replace what's in the AP curriculum. And that was a big concern for parents, especially because in addition to parents wanting to make sure that their kids are seen and taken care of, there's always this piece of we want our kids to go to the best colleges available. And that's a big part of why people are really interested in independent schools. So for me to be able to include the things that I enjoyed and loved as a Spanish scholar or as a foreign language scholar or as a music scholar, and to be able to incorporate those into my lessons is really nice. And not have to worry about, well, we just have to blow through this because we have to hit, certain milestones or by the end of the school year is nice. But then on the personal level, being in independent schools, they value your time outside of school. They value what you bring to the community as a person. And so they allow me to still have, pursue my other passions. I work for a lot of music festivals and concert tours during the summer months. And so I've worked with some really big stars. I've actually been doing that longer than I've been in education. And all the schools that I've worked at have honored that and have respected that. And they're like, that's actually an add-on. It's not something that is a takeaway or that feels like that deters my candidacy. They're like, oh, that's awesome. You definitely need your time away from school and to, do what you love to do, pursue your passions or what have you, so that when you are at school, you are fully invested and you're not feeling like bitter or I wish I could have had time to do this or I wish I could have had time to do that. So it's really nice. And actually, I've been able to incorporate school life with that. So at one of the music festivals I work at, I actually do internships with students now. I bring students on board who are musicians or who are interested into lighting or sound or working in stage and theater and tech. So it was really nice that the schools that I've been at have appreciated that other side of me. And I haven't just been pigeonholed as a language instructor or an advisor or an administrator. They appreciate the things that I do outside. And, we have at all the schools I've been at, playwrights, actors, musicians that are on staff, amazing chefs, caterers, all kinds of things. And for that to be able to be reflected amongst your faculty is really cool.
And I can truly tell you that the three of you really are making extraordinary contributions to the communities that you work with and beyond. We have just a strong connection across schools as well. So if you are not currently in an independent school and you're looking to join our schools, one of the things that we can also speak to is that we reach out to our counterparts at other schools, and whether it's in person or just via these types of platforms or an email or a text or a phone call or anything, any way to really connect with each other. There's a camaraderie that I think truly exists that also provides incredible support. And so the last question that I have for all of you in like 1 or 2 sentences, what advice would you offer candidates of color? We are on the cusp of the NYSAIS job fair to promote diversity this Saturday from 10 to 2 p.m. We have 102 schools that will be present. What would be, in 1 or 2 sentences, a piece of advice that you would offer people who are viewing, listening, joining us at this moment? Elizabeth, let's have you start, and Rashed, you'll go second, and Matt, you'll turn it back to me.
Sure. I think it's very simple, is that if you, kind of two two questions or two things to think about is one, if you have a LinkedIn profile, if you don't, build it today, tonight, wherever you are when you're watching this, make sure you build it and it communicates what you want. If you are a career changer, and you want to be a science teacher, start posting about things about science or reposting about science articles that you're really into. And then make sure the second thing is the schools that you are interested in, go on LinkedIn, and it might be your second, your third, your fourth connection, and just direct message that teacher or that administrator, say, you know what, I know on your website you don't have any openings, but I'd love to talk to you about your school community, so that when the day does come that you do have an opening, I'd love to be considered. And so can we just have an informational interview? So the key is LinkedIn, and just keep working at it.
I have really 3 bullet points. I know, Liz, you said 2 sentences, but 3 bullet points. One, do your homework. Make sure you understand the profile of the schools that you're interested in. So comb through their website, see what they're about. Make sure you understand what their mission statement is, right? So make sure you really understand the profile of the school. Second bullet point is don't be afraid to ask for what you need in order to take the job. So ask about continuing education. Ask about what retirement plans look like. Ask about what the benefits are. I think sometimes people are so excited that they might have the opportunity to get the job that they forget to ask about those questions. So ask about those benefits. And then thirdly, and lastly, have confidence in what you bring to the table. And remember, as much as you're interviewing for a position at the school and they're interviewing you, you're interviewing the school as well to see if it's a place where you can see yourself contributing and being a valued member of the community. Just don't say, oh, I'm so happy that I'm getting a job offer from them, but really do your homework and interview them as well to see if this is a place that, is a nice match and is compatible for you.
So my advice, I'm taking a little bit from both Elizabeth and Rashed. So I was going to say have confidence, but also be fearless. You have the potential of changing these schools and making a difference in these schools. So be you, be your authentic you, because that's what schools are interested in, authentic people. So be you. And the other thing that I wanted to say was, in terms of, Elizabeth mentioned something earlier about connections and things like that. Just because they don't have a position listed in your area, have a conversation. Quite honestly, some schools, and I know for a quick anecdote, one of the best teachers that I know did not come from an educational background. She came from the Peace Corps. And that's non-traditional, but she is probably one of the best teachers that I've observed. So a school might see that and say, you know what, let's do it. And they'll think outside of the box. And that's another thing why independent schools are great, because they can do things like that. But pursue schools that you have a great interest in. Like Rashed said, do your homework. And if you find a school whose mission and what they do resonates with you, make some time with that school. Liz?
Thanks, Matt.
Sorry, Liz, can I just
Yes.
add one last thing?
Sure.
Please, and this happens a lot, and this gets people disqualified. Please make sure you have quite a few eyes look over your cover letter and your resume. If I see typos in your cover letter, ooh, that's not good. So make sure you have people to go over your documents before you start submitting them, and make sure you submit them on time, because a lot of job postings will say they will give you a deadline to upload your things.
Thanks, Rashed. And actually, on that note, I just put in the chat for everyone to view any of the other webinars, including resume do's and don'ts. If you're transitioning from different positions, if you want to hear completely different perspectives on what it's like to be an independent school educator of color, if you want to learn about transitioning from public charter parochial schools, if you want to understand a little more about what the virtual hiring process is going to look like. We've done 7 webinars in the last 3 weeks to support the candidate pool, to really ensure and strengthen and leverage your knowledge base so that when you begin the process, that you have as much information as possible. So I invite you all to check out the NYSAIS YouTube channel. I put it in the chat. And if you are viewing this after the fact, I encourage you to go to the NYSAIS website and to look for the link for the candidate webinars. And if you have any difficulty through the job fair link to find those candidate webinars and the YouTube channel link, please do not hesitate to email me at jobfair@nysais.org. Our goal is to ensure that everyone who attends the NYSAIS job fair this Saturday from 10 to 2, as well as anyone who is embarking on a search process for a new position, has the support that they need, has someone to be able to answer questions. And I certainly welcome the opportunity to serve in that capacity for you at this time and after the fact. I want to recognize and thank my dear colleagues, Matt, Rashed, and Elizabeth. I want to recognize and thank Marcy, my colleague at NYSAIS, and I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening or for viewing this. I sincerely hope that these webinars have served to answer some questions, to give you some insight. I will absolutely end with, there is work to be done everywhere. None of our schools claim to be perfect. There is work to be done at higher ed. There's work to be done in corporate America and the nonprofit sector, in any and all kinds of educational institutions. And we're looking for people who are interested in committing to joining us and being part of our communities so that we can continue to hold our schools accountable and to ensure that the young people that are entrusted to our care are able to learn and grow and develop and be, as Matt said, their most authentic and fearless selves as they go out and help us make this world, quite frankly, a better place. So let's recognize that you all can be part of that. We welcome and support you in this process and look forward to hearing about your successes, if not this year, then certainly in the future. Best of luck to everybody and have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most of all, stay hopeful. We will get through this moment.